Hey guys, I'm Jim. I edit photos. Thanks for stopping by. Today I'm in Luminar AI and I'm having a play around with a nighttime cityscape that I shot in Brussels a few years ago. And in editing this photo, I realized that there were 5 things that I did that really, to me, made the difference in this photo. I'm going to walk through these tips here. So these are 5 tips to help you improve your nighttime cityscapes. Let's take a look at this. This is in Grand Place, their big town square in Brussels. I shot this, it was like 7 or 8 years ago. God, I want to go back. It's a town that's like, you know, great architecture, great photography, great beer, great chocolate. I mean, it's like heaven. So anyway, this is the shot. The first thing I did is go into Composition AI. If you look here, I did straighten the verticals. I also cropped it into a 16:9. That's just a personal preference. But when I have scenes like this, there's a few things I want to work on. It's too dark. It's too yellow. There's not enough like stuff going on for me. It's just kind of dark and blah. So tip number 1 is I tend to try a little bit of accent AI first, kind of before I do anything else. So in this case, I went to about 23 and I brightened that up a little bit. And I think it had a nice impact on the photo. So there's the before and there's the after. So tip number 1, just try a little bit of accent AI. I tend not to go real high because I don't want something like that. Because accent AI, keep in mind, it's not just brightening the photo. It does do that, but it also impacts contrast, which impacts color, and it does things like that. So I don't want to do this kind of stuff. So I'm going kind of low. I think I was at 23, and I'm going to do other things to really brighten the photo, change the mood, that sort of thing. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 for me is change the temperature, and that is because these photos, they tend to be pretty yellow. So that's because there's so much of these kind of lights in cities that if you can just adjust the temperature, I think you make a huge amount of progress. I tend to pull the temp as well. I think that helps balance because that yellowy light has almost a little bit of green to it. So if you want to move the tint to the right, you get away from the green and toward the magenta. So the temperature tint combo is tip number 2. It really helps. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of contrast here. And I'm going to pull down the highlights quite a bit because they're fairly bright. So, you know, maybe something about like that. And I'm going to pull the shadows up just a kind of a hair, like a 6, just to kind of get that going. So those are the first 2 tips. The next thing I'm going to do, this is not one of the tips, I'm just going to do this because I want to do this in the photo, and that is I'm going to go ahead and add some structure AI, but I am going to remove it from the sky because I don't really need any structure going into the sky. I really just want that structure going into the buildings. So my mask looks like that. Basically, I increased structure and I technically erased it from the sky, but you could paint it into the buildings. I just erased it from the sky because it's a smaller area, therefore it's quicker to do. I'm gonna go ahead and hide mask, and if I turn this off, you can see, if you look at the buildings, a little bit darker. Keep in mind, structure AI actually does tend to brighten the areas that you use it in a little bit. But anyway, there it is before, a little bit softer, a little bit darker, and now a little bit more of that texture is coming through, which is what I like so much about structure AI. I think it does a great job of kind of accentuating that. So that is the next move, but the 2 tips so far were enhance AI and the temperature adjustment. The third tip is actually in landscape, I'm going to use golden hour, which seems a little bit odd, but I do just a little bit here. And that's because if you look at this photo, there are some areas in gold where, you know, there's these different kind of things in the building that are kind of accented in gold. You don't have that in every place, of course, but I feel like here I wanted to pop them a little bit. And this also warms up a little bit of the surface of the buildings, which I'm okay with. I just don't want a massive golden warmth overall, but a little bit of warmth across those areas. I think that looks fine. So if I turn that off, there it is before and there it is after. It's very minor, but it's going to come into play and be a little bit more prominent when I do my next move. So just a touch of that for effect. And that was tip number 3. Now tip number 4 is over here in toning, and this is, I'm going to use split toning. I'm going to start in highlights, and I'm going to go to about a 58 in terms of the saturation level for the highlights. But the hue, I'm going to get way over here into the blue. So this is like 222, something like that. And you can see the impact that has had on this photo. There it is before, and there it is after. That's tamed a little bit of that warmer look that is present in the building facade. And that's one of the reasons I use golden hour, because I want some of that warm golden tones, and especially in those areas where it's really called out and prominent, like these little accents, if you will. I wanted those to kind of pop a little bit because I knew I was going to be doing this. But now I'm going to come over here to shadows, and I'm going to do a saturation level of about 38, but my hue is also going to be in the blues, and that's going to be about a 245. And so that has created a little bit cooler mood overall in the photo. So let me show you the before. There it is, a little bit warmer, a little bit more yellow, for lack of a better word. And this toning, because I went in kind of the blue for both, has actually tamed that a little bit. And you could actually, it's looking a little bit too blue to me now. I'm actually going to pull the amount down, maybe about a 40, and let me try a 35 as well. I think that looks better. So I'm going to do something about like that. So there it is. Before, you can sense the warmer tone overall. And the after, there it is, much more under control, but those warmer, those golden accent areas are kind of popping, and some of that is due to this landscape golden hour filter. So let me turn that off. There it is before, and then I turn that back on. It's minor, and you could bump it up if you wanted to really accentuate that, but then you run the risk, because golden hour is applying all over the photo, it's really warming up a lot of those tones in lots of places. So I think I was at about an 18. I'm going to leave it there just to give me a nice little pop of that golden, those spots kind of jumping out at me. So basically tip number 4 was use split toning to really alter the mood in your photo. There it is, much more yellow, that sort of thing. And there it is, quite a bit cooler, but because of that golden hour, those golden areas do pop out. I think it's a nice color contrast. Keep in mind, blue and yellow are opposite on the color wheel. Therefore, they're complementary. So I'm kind of playing to that here a little bit. More blue with pops of yellow. I think it looks nice together. Okay, and tip number 5 for these is super contrast. Use this tool to selectively apply contrast. So what I ended up doing is going to about a 52 here, about a 45 in midtones contrast, and about a 35 in shadows contrast. And so just to be clear, every time I use super contrast, it's an experiment. There is never literally ever a time when I just walk in and say, oh, I'm going to do a 37 on this and just do it. I have no idea, to be honest. So just to be clear, I get to these via experimentation. But what I typically do is slide those contrast sliders over, and then I come back and play around with the balance on each one. And in this case, what I kind of landed on is what I'm kind of landing on here, which is negative on midtones and shadows, but positive on highlights. Let me get this just right. There you go. Now let me turn this off. There it is before, and there it is after. Notice the contrast brings back a little bit more of that warm tone, but I think it also really helps pop those areas where those gold accents are on the building. So if I turn this off, that's what it looked like before. And now it's got a little bit more warmth across the face of the building, which is okay. The contrast really helped it pop. So if you wanted to reduce that warmth, you could come back up here to toning and pull up that amount a little bit just to get a little bit more of that blue in there like that. So I think I was at 50 initially, something about like that. And then while I was using this tool, I pulled it down to 35, but I actually think I might go to maybe about 40 now. And so that's another thing I do often is I'll do my edit, and then I'll often go back to individual tools or filters and adjust them further just to refine them and get the exact look that I want. But tip number 5 was using super contrast to selectively apply contrast in the different tonal areas of the photo, because it went from something looking like that to that, which to me is a little bit more lively, a little bit more exciting, and contrast just does help a photo pop. So those are really the 5 things, the 5 tips that I keep in mind when editing these kind of scenes. Trying a little bit of accent AI, adjusting the temperature just to get those warmer tones a bit under control, because I tend to find they really look yellow, sometimes kind of green, and I just don't like that a whole lot. I like it to be more blue. Tip number 3 is using a little bit of golden hour, just a touch for effect. 4 is using a little bit of split toning in order to alter or adjust the mood. And then tip number 5 is using super contrast to selectively apply contrast across the photo to really just refine the overall look. So if I give you a sliding window view here, you can see, of course, the composition AI is showing here in the before and after as well. So you can see kind of a wide, well, not kind of, it is a wide angle lens. It has been cropped. Wide angle lenses tend to make buildings like that look like they're leaning backwards. And so composition AI comes in really handy, but then all the other moves is really allowed me to get this photo under control and to go from something like that to that, which is my finished product, and one, frankly, that I like quite a bit. And to answer the obvious question, This was about 6 a.m. Grand Place is just a mess, full of people, full of tourists every time that I've been there, which of course, thanks to COVID, it's probably empty now, but it is generally speaking very crowded at sunset and even at night. But at 6 a.m., it is blissfully empty and frankly, quite beautiful. So that's how I got this shot, and those are my 5 tips for making it look better. Hope it helps, my friends. Hope it gives you some ideas, and I'll be back really soon with more videos. You guys take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time, and adios.